Okay, so welcome back. Today we're going to be looking at inflation. All right, and this is going to be a little bit longer of a video because I'm going to try and get a fair chunk of it in. But we're going to be looking at a couple of different things, looking at the distinction between inflation, disinflation, deflation, how they measure it with using what they call this consumer price index, or the CPI. Then we're going to look at how inflation affects different people and other ways that they measure it, talking about a core rate of inflation, and we'll look at that a little bit more closely. Then we'll look at something called the producer price index, which is similar to the consumer, but obviously for the producer. Then we're going to construct a price index ourselves and figure out how to calculate the inflation rate from a set of data that's provided. So typically to calculate the inflation rate, we would look at the CPI data. So we'll get to that in just a bit. So anyway, let's just go ahead and get started. So the first thing we need to do is distinguish between inflation, disinflation, and deflation. And so, as you can see, this is a chart of inflation over the last, since 1990, over the last 22 years. All right. And so what we want to do first, with any of these charts, let's make it a little colorful. We want to be able to look at the zero. Look at where it's zero, because this is a percent change from year to year. All right, and so this will help us in establishing what we mean by inflation, what we mean by disinflation, and what we mean by deflation. And so let's just write a couple of definitions out real quick. So inflation is simply a general, back that up, a rise in the general price level in a country. Now, this isn't talking about one specific good or anything like that, because certainly we know that some goods will increase in price and some goods will decrease in price. But all we're saying is that collectively, when taken all together, what are the prices for things? What do they do? What are the prices doing? So, anyway, so that's inflation, and then we have disinflation. Disinflation. All right, and that's when let me think of a good way to put this. This is a slowing of inflation. And so that doesn't mean that inflation has gone negative, because that would be deflation, which we'll talk about here in just a second. But disinflation says that if last year inflation was 5%, then this year it's 3%. All right, we still have inflation, but it's growing at a slower rate than before. All right, and then finally, the last thing is deflation, and that is a decrease in the general price level. The general price level. All right. So let's look at this graph, and this will kind of help us explain it. So let's take this point here. All right, going up to that point there. All right. So if I said what was the inflation rate in 2006, or the percent change in inflation, you would say inflation changed 1.5%. So something happened that caused inflation to go up. Now, what if we came down this other side and said, what about the inflation here? All right, is inflation still going up? So we're coming down this line. Inflation's still going up, but it's not going up nearly as fast as it was just right over here, and so that would be called disinflation. All right, now you can see, since this is our zero line, have we had any moments of deflation? Not inflation or disinflation, but deflation. And so all you would do is say, you know what, this is deflation, that's deflation, that's deflation, and then this is the Great Recession. All right, so you can see that prices were kind of humming along, kind of doing their own thing, and we've really had, since the late 70s, early 80s, we've really had real controlled inflation in the U.S. And as you can see, we still don't have, in the last 22 years, we haven't had any bad inflation. So they seem to have gotten a lot of it right. But then 2008 hit, and the bottom dropped out, and that's when we had this big tank in deflation. And we'll talk about why that's a bad thing, because typically we think prices are going down, hey, this is a good thing for consumers, but actually it's not. All right, it's not good for the economy. So anyway, here would be another period of deflation. Then this is inflation, Coming down this way is disinflation. So anyway, so that's that. Now I want to take a look at the CPI and what the CPI is. All right. So let me see if I can wiggle. Figure out where my chart is. There we go. So let me move this over. I want to go there. Oh, let me move it back now. Okay, so this is the website for the Bureau of Labor Statistics. They're the ones who keep they're the ones responsible for measuring the CPI, the Consumer Price Index. And so all this is a measure of the prices of consumer goods throughout the country. So remember, there's four types of different spending for people that buy. The consumers, the businesses, governments, and then we have net exports. All right, and so this here is a measure of consumer goods, and that accounts for 68%, give or take. And so here's how they do it, and I'll explain how they come up with these index values later. And so this column measures the relative importance of all these different goods. And so just real quick, the CPI, they say it measures a market basket of goods and services, and they do this every month. All right, and so they'll take all these different things. So what this is saying is that in 2011, December of 2011, they take all the items, and so here's how all the items break down. They would say, look, we spend 15.256% of our spending on food. All right, and of that 15%, here's where it comes from. 14.3% is food. All right, the other is beverage. 14.3% is food. 8.6% of that is food at home, and so half of this number is taken up by food at home. And they break that up a little further, and they say cereals and bakery products, meats, poultry, fish, and eggs, dairy and related, non-alcoholic beverage and beverage materials. Then they talk about other food at home, sugar, sweets, oils, fats, things like that. Then food away from home, so this is our dining out budget. And so roughly 5.7% of our spending goes to eating out. Then alcoholic beverages is close to 1%. And so if you put all these together, then you get 15%, 15.2% of the spending. And so when we're deciding how much to weigh the increases in prices, if food went up by 20%, you would say it went up by 20%, and that's basically 15% of people's spending. And so we're going to look at that a little bit more in just a bit. But anyway, so you can see here's food. That takes up 15%. Housing or shelter is definitely a big one. Let me see if I can make this to where I can scroll down. Nope. All right. Oh, yep, I can. So housing is 41%. Let me go back real quick. So food and beverage. Let's look at the rest of this. The unadjusted indexes for August and September. And so I'm gonna show you a little bit later what these indexes mean. So we can take these numbers will be used to help us measure inflation. So here's the percent change in inflation. So if we look at food, food went up 1.6% in September of 2011. From, let's see, this is August to September of this current year. And so from August to September, we had a 0.1 increase in food and beverage. We had a 0.3 increase in housing and a 0.3 in apparel. So we'll look at that in just a second. So this column over here looks at period to period. So anyway, so let's look at a little bit more of what makes up the CPI, all right, Consumer Price Index. And so housing is 41%. Of that, 31% or so is shelter. And here's how they break up shelter. They have rent of primary residences. And so if you own your house, lodging away from home, that'd be going to a hotel, on a vacation maybe, or a business trip. Owner's equivalent rent of residences. So anyway, so this is all the different ones they do. Fuels and utilities, household energy. I'm not going to read all these to you, but you can freeze this if you want and take a harder look at it. But you can see here was a big jump in, this was 2.7, so that's fuel, oil, and other fuels. So you can see that was a pretty big jump for the month. There's water. So we've got food and housing. We also have apparel, so clothing, things like that. And you can see how that makes it up. That's about 3.5%. Transportation is almost 17%. So you can see private transportation, that's buying, new and used motor vehicles, new vehicles, used cars and trucks. Motor fuel is 5% of our income for the most part. Then we get to medical care, about 7% of what we spend. Scroll down a little bit more here. Recreation is 6%. Education and communication, about 6.8%. And then other goods and services, tobacco and smoking products, about 0.8%, personal care, and so on. So anyway, and if you're feeling particularly bored one day, you can go through and then you can really get into all these numbers. So they break it down a lot more. I'm not going to do that for you here. So, but this is how they do it. These are the items that they measure, and they measure them on a monthly basis. And they take a market basket and they say, okay, what's happening to the overall price of sugars and sweets? All right, and from month to month they'll change it. All right, so that's that. Let me get back to this. And so that's the CPI. All right. Now, a couple different things. Explain that different income earners may experience a different rate of inflation when their pattern of consumption is not accurately reflected. And so the only thing this is talking about is, let's say that you have, it's picture time. Say you've got, this is the dad, and you've got the mom, and you've got all the little kids. All right. So let's say they got 4 kids, and they're not going to have faces. So this will be their spending. Then you're going to have, let's say, just a single guy. I'm 23. All right. And so you got him. Then you're going to have a grandmother. I'm 73. How about that? All right. And so when we look at the CPI and inflation itself, inflation is definitely going to affect people in different ways. All right. And so if you think about what are some of the spending habits that a family of 6 here would have, let's make her happy, that a family of 6 here would have versus a single person who's 23 years old versus a grandmother who's 73. And so, if we're looking here, you got diapers that you're buying, and your groceries are much higher here. Over here, you might be out to eat more. All right, let's say they have a hobby. They like to go cycling. All right, and here, the grandmother, she's buying a lot of cookies for the grandkids, things like that. And so, but anyway, the gist of this is that inflation is definitely going to affect people in different ways. Let's say that this person, let's say they're a taxi driver. All right, what if gasoline prices go up, inflation, is that going to affect this person more so than this person? Definitely. All right, and so this is what we're talking about, that the pattern of consumption is not necessarily reflected by the CPI, because if we go back to those statistics that we looked at just a second ago, this person's percentage of their income isn't going to be the same for housing or food, especially, as this family of 6. All right, so that's all they're talking about. All right, next one, explain that inflation figures may not accurately reflect changes in consumption patterns and the quality of the products purchased. All right, so let's do another picture here. So this is a car. Not a very good one, but it's a car. Let's say that this one was made, let's make that the front, it's a headlight. This one was made in 1950. All right, then we're going to have another car. And this is going to be made in 2012. All right, so which of these would you rather own? Well, let me back that up. Which is a better car? Okay, because if we look at the price, the price of a car in 1950, and I'm kind of making this up, I think I'm kind of close, might have been around $5,000 bucks. And if we adjust that for inflation, we might be up to somewhere around $27,000, meaning that these would be equivalent prices given the wages of the time. And so, is it fair to compare this car to this car? All right, and the answer should be rather obvious to you, and that is no. All right, what advantage does this car have over the one made in 1950? And so we can start off. Safety is the big one. This has airbags, it's got seat belts, it's got anti-lock brakes, it's got release bolts that if you get hit head on and the engine drops away from the car. It's got crumple zones, so if you get hit head on, this will fold up like an accordion to avoid all the shock coming in here. The glass is different. I mean, the whole car is very different. All right, traction control, I mean, you name it. And so this is a much better car. This one was one big hunk of steel. Probably didn't have a seat belt. Those came along more in the 60s, and so this is more of the death trap, and this is much more of a safe bet. What about reliability? If you buy a car today, how reliable do you think it will be? And so you would expect to at least get 200,000 miles out of a car today, whereas back here, if you're hitting 120, you're thinking you're pretty close to the end of the life of the car. And so I'm kind of belaboring this point a little bit in that when we look at the goods that are measured in the Consumer Price Index, it doesn't take any consideration into quality. And so even if we're paying an equivalent amount that we were back, 62 years ago, the quality of what we're getting for our dollar is much, much better. Okay, so that's what they mean by this second bullet here. All right, and that goes for a lot of different products. Just think of any product. And then we also have the problem of new products being put onto the market, some stuff like computers. All right, the equipment that I'm using to make this video wasn't around 15 or 20 years ago. I couldn't have done this, and so same kind of thing. So the CPI, that's one of the limitations that it has. It doesn't reflect changes in consumption patterns. That would be different products being bought over different time periods. And it also doesn't reflect the quality of the products. All right, now the last thing that we want to look at on this page. Let me get rid of all this. Whoops, not that. Oh, Lord. Sorry. Try that again. All right, so economists measure a core underlying rate of inflation to eliminate the effects of sudden swings in the price of food and oil. All right, and so we saw on this other back here, I think. So we saw back here that food accounts for a fair chunk, 15%, and energy, we looked at a couple of different places, accounted also for a fair chunk. And so the problem is, if we measure oil, if we have a big increase in oil, if oil prices increase by 30%, not dollars, 30%, is that going to have an effect on the CPI? And the answer is definitely yes. All right. How about food? And well, so this is why they do these two. If food goes up by 30%, that'll definitely have a big impact on the CPI. And so they pull these two out. A lot of times they call it measuring a core rate of inflation is looking at all that stuff that we just looked at and taking these two out. And that's because oil and food are very, very volatile. Oh Lord, don't know how to spell it. Volatile. Volatile. All right. And so if we have wild swings in oil and food, then it might influence CPI and give us kind of a false impression of what the general level of prices are doing. All right. Now, no, we'll just leave it at that. So we have this core rate of inflation that takes away the impacts of fluctuations of oil and food. All right. So here we go. Explain that a producer price index measures changes in the prices of factors of production. So remember, factors of production are land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship. And so if any of these go up, so let's say that the price of labor starts to go up, then we would expect to see the costs of production go up. All right. And so all this is saying is, look, if the costs of production are going up, so say the costs of production are going up, is this a predictor for an increase in consumer inflation in the CPI? And so you would imagine yes, because producers, if their costs are rising, they're going to want to pass on those costs as much as they can to the consumers. And again, this gets into price elasticity of the different products, but generally we would say that the PPI is what they call a leading indicator of inflation. All right. So we can see that this dropped, and that was a predictor of consumer prices. All right. And so there's some correlation. It's not perfect because remember they can't pass on all the prices to the consumer, and so they do have to eat some of them. So that's what the PPI is, Producer Price Index. All right, now this is going to take just a bit, but we want to construct what they call a weighted price index. And so here's how price indexes or indices work. All right, and so we're going to take a couple of different items. This is going to be our market basket. We're going to have pizza, and we're going to have shirts, and cable television, and bike tires. All right, we'll leave it at that. And then, so this is our market basket. So let's draw some lines here. All right, and then at the bottom we're going to have total expenditure. And we're also going to have CPI. All right, so up here we're going to look at the quantity. All right, we have to choose a quantity that we're going to buy because what we're doing is comparing these month to month, and the quantity's got to stay the same. If the quantity changes, we won't be able to tell if there's been a change in price. So we're going to look at the quantity, we're going to look at the price in year one, and then the total expenditure, spending, in year one. All right, I'm going to look at the price in year two, and the total expenditure in year two. Then let's do 3 years. Price in year three, and the total expenditure in year three. All right. So let's just make up some numbers here. So for the quantity of pizzas, let's say we're going to get 30 pizzas, 20 shirts, 15 people buying cable television, 3 bike tires. All right. So let me draw a line here so we can kind of see where the products end and the calculations begin. All right. So let's say that the price, let's go back to blue. The price of a pizza, we'll say is 10 bucks. Let's say that a shirt costs 15 bucks. Cable television is 50. And bike tires, these are for road bikes, so they're $40. So to calculate the total expenditure, all we do is take the quantity times the price. All right, and so let's do total expenditure in red here. Or how about red? So the total expenditure for that is 300. For this one, it's also 300. For the next one, 15 times 50 is 750. Then 3 times 40 is 120. And so what we want to do is add all of these up. All right, and so when you add all these up, you get $1,470. All right, and that'd be our total expenditure for year one. All right, so the next, and actually these shouldn't be years if we're doing it realistically, it'd be months. But anyway, so now let's say that the next year comes. We'll just do it on a yearly basis, and the price of a pizza goes from $10 a pizza, and now it's $12 a pizza. And then let's say shirts cost $9. They went down a little bit. Cable television went up to 53, and something happened to the bike industry, and bike tires went up a lot. All right, so now we want to calculate the total expenditure again. All right, so now we're going to take this 30 times 12, and that's going to give us 360. Then the 20 times $9, that's going to give us 180. Uh-oh, I got a wrong calculation here. Then we're going to look at cable television. So 15 times 53, which is $795. And then 3 times 50 and that's 150. All right. Now, let me go. My calculation was a little bit off, so that would be a 5 there, 14, 23, 28, 2 there, 5, 6, 13, 14. All right, so 1485 is the total. And so what can you tell? Can we say that prices went up between these 2 years? So our market basket was 1470. Our new market basket's 1485, and so we can say that there was some level of inflation between those 2 years. All right. Now let's do year 3. Let's say the price of this goes to $14, then 16, and 55, and 50. All right, and then our total expenditure, 14 times 30. And after that one was wrong on my paper that I'm looking at, I think these are right, but I might have to stand corrected. 320, 825, 150, and 150. That's it. And so then let's add them all up, and that comes to $1,715. And so what happened between years 2 and year 3, we can say that there was inflation again. All right. So now what we want to do is convert this into an index. All right, and this would be the CPI. The I is for index. And so all this is going to allow us to do is measure one time period to another, and it's going to be, let me just work it out, and so then you can see. All right, let's pick a different color here. So separate it out. And so we're going to pick this year as what we call our base year. And the base year is always equal to 100. And you'll see why in just a second. So the base year, to calculate the CPI, whoops, let me not do it there. All right, to calculate the CPI, we take the current year divided by the base year times 100. Okay, and so we're going to take, if you look at the CPI in the first year, then you can see that you are really just dividing that number by itself. So if we would take 1470, just do it over here, the current year that we're looking at, divided by 1470, which is the base year, times 100, and you're going to get the value of 100. So that's why the base year is always equal to 100. All right, and so for the second one, we're going to take, let me erase that real quick. Just get rid of all that. And so in the second year, we're going to say, here's the total expenditure, so 1485 divided by 1470 times 100. So if we do that math out, I'm doing it on a calculator here, divided by 1470, that's 101.02. All right, and so we can say that inflation has gone up, and so here's one of the nice things with using an index. For one, you don't have to worry about all these huge numbers, but also if you're comparing a year back to the base year, all you need to do is subtract these two, and so now we can say that inflation's gone up 1.02% since the base year. All right, and this you can only subtract when you're doing it for the base, comparing something back to the base year. All right, how about year 3? What would be the CPI value for year 3? So again, we take the 1715 divided by 1470, and that equals 116.67. All right, and so now we can look and say, yep, this index value has gone up. And so what if I said how much did it go up from year 1 to year 3? All you need to do is subtract these two numbers, and so we'd say that that'd be 16.7% inflation. Okay, so that's kind of the easy part. But you do need to be able to, if I give you a list of items, to be able to construct this market basket. All right, and since we have different quantities, that is what they mean by weighting it in a different way. So we don't want 1, 1, 1, and 1. All right, we want to give some kind of indication as to what percentage of our income goes to these things, or how many do we buy. So anyway, let's keep going. So now, here's what you need to learn how to do, and that is to say, what is the inflation rate from year 2 to year 3? All right. So here is the formula, and this is what I think they call percent error. I'm sure it has a technical name. I'm pretty sure that's it. So what we're going to do is take the new CPI minus the old CPI, divided by the old, got singing outside my door, divided by the old, and multiply that by 100. And so if I said, what was the inflation rate between year 2 and year 3, then you got to do some math. All right, so we would take 116.67 minus 101.202, excuse me, divide all of that by 101.02 times 100, and give me just a second. I got to work that out. If you want to hit pause, let's see, 116.67 minus 101.02 divided by 101.02 equals times 100. And so this gives us an inflation rate of 15.49%. All right, so this is what you need to be able to do. You're either going to see CPI values, and you'll be asked to calculate the inflation rate from that. And so that's what this one's talking about. All right, so I'll do that in just a second. And you also need to be able to construct a price index. And so the price index looks at all these different types of goods. And so after doing this, let me go back just real briefly and show you. Where's it at? Here. And so all of these different items within the CPI, this is what they've done. They've done this. They've done this to it. They've constructed a price index for it. So let me go back up here. All right. Now let me skip that. I'm just going to make that another video. Ooh, that's a lot. But let me just give you one or two examples to work out. And so the CPI data, 1982 to 1984, the CPI value was 100. And so that's our base year. The average of those was 100. And so if we're looking at today's values, so 2012, I think we're around 235 or so. And so one thing we can say is, what's been the rate of inflation from 1984 to 2012? And since we're relating it back to the base year, we can subtract. And so we can say that prices have gone up 135% since then. Now, what if I pick the year 2000, and I'm making this up, I should have looked it up, but I didn't. Let's say that it's 184, it's the CPI value. And I said, what is the inflation rate between 2000 and 2012? All right, and so this is where you need to use that formula. So click pause and try and work this one out just to make sure that you can get this how to calculate a rate of inflation. So all right, hopefully you did that. Hopefully you click pause. So to do this calculation, remember it's the new minus the old divided by the old times 100. So that's 235 minus 184 divided by 184 times 100. And let me work this out real quick. 235 divided by 184. I'm sorry. Give me just a second. 235 minus 184 equals divided by 184 times 100. And so inflation has gone up 27.7%. All right. Now, in another video, we're going to look at how we can adjust prices. So if something cost, $5 back in 1970, how much should it cost today? And we can use the CPI data for that. But I'm going to leave it here. This is a little bit longer than I thought, but and we still have some other stuff to go. So anyway, take a break, and until next time.